Hello everyone, my name is Fermin. Welcome back to OFW Power. It's been a while po mga kaibigan. In this episode, pag-uusapan po natin ang ukol sa mutual fund. Let us know the basics and all the things that you need to know before you start to invest in a mutual fund. Diyan lang po kayo at subaybayan po ninyo ang video na ito. Welcome back po mga kaibigan. Sa video na ito, malalaman po ninyo ano ang mutual fund at paano po tayo makapag-invest sa mutual fund. Simulan na po natin. So it all starts with us, investors, individual investors, and pwede rin ang mga pension funds, insurance companies, and banks. Pwede din po silang mag-invest sa isang mutual fund. Ang mutual fund ay isang company na regulated by the appropriate regulating agencies. So the investors have capital to invest in the mutual fund company. Ang mutual fund naman in return ay maaaring i-invest ang ating pera na pinagsama-sama or pooled money sa mga equities. Kung tawagin natin ay underlying assets. Instead of us buying directly into Apple, Amazon, Facebook, at kung sa Pilipinas ay Jollibee or Bank of the Philippine Islands, no? Ang mutual fund company ang bibili ng mga underlying assets na ito. Ang tawag nito ay mga equities because these are common stocks that are listed in the stocks exchange. Kung ang mutual fund ay mag-invest sa stock market, ang tawag natin sa mutual fund na yon is an equity mutual fund or sometimes it's also called an equity fund. Pwede ring tawagin nating equity index fund. So meron tayong separate video about this. In the US market, may tinatawag silang large cap fund or mid cap fund and small cap fund depending on the type of companies kung saan doon nag-invest ang mutual fund. In short, maaaring bumili ang mutual fund ng mga stocks directly into the stock market to make up its underlying assets. In return, the mutual fund can earn dividends from the companies or the underlying assets, and it can also gain through capital appreciation kung tataas ang value ng mga stocks na yun. And then, since kumita ang mutual fund, that income will be shared to the shareholders of the fund, which are the investors. So tayo yun, ano? Individuals and also those banks and institutions like pension funds and insurance companies. So how do we earn? So we earn through the dividends declared by the mutual fund company, or we can also earn through capital appreciation. So our capital appreciation is in the form of the increase in the net asset value per share, or kung tawagin natin ay NAVPS. Now, there's another type of asset na maaaring bilhin ng fund. The other type of asset that the mutual fund can own is what we call as debt instruments. So, pagkakautang po ito. The mutual fund can also buy debt instruments. Kung tawagin natin ay bonds. May dalawang uring pagmumulan sa bonds. Maaaring ang underlying asset nito ay issued by the government. Ang tawag dun ay mga treasury bonds or treasury bills and treasury notes. And then, it could also be issued by private corporations. Ang tawag naman nito ay mga corporate bonds. Kapag issued by the government, so that's a very safe instrument, and corporate bonds are also relatively safer as compared to equity assets. In the US, may tatlong uri ng treasury debt instruments na ini-issue ng US government, and that's treasury bills, treasury notes, and treasury bonds. Kapag sinabing treasury bills, that's typically less than 1 year. Treasury notes naman, 1 to 10 years maturity. And then the treasury bonds are greater than 10 years maturity. So how do we earn? Or how does the mutual fund company earns if it owns debt instruments? So debt instruments ay fixed income instruments nakalagay sa coupon in the form of interest. Now, investing in a mutual fund company is not free. So this is not, it is not a free lunch. So it comes with a cost. Sapagkat ang mutual fund company, typically, especially those that are actively managed, ay meron silang fund manager. So the fund manager will strategize the investment, and it also decides what assets to buy and when to sell those assets. So there's only one objective of the fund manager, and that is to beat the benchmark, or that is to outperform the benchmark, or to maximize the returns or kita ng fund. We pay the fund manager through what we call as a management fee. So, ang typical na management fee ay nasa 1%. And then there are operating expenses of the fund because it maintains the building or the office that they have. They have to pay for the staff. That's the operating expenses of the funds. Typically, ang mga expense ratio nasa 1% to 3%. So how do we calculate that expense ratio? For example, the expense ratio of the fund, which is determined by the mutual fund company, ay 1.5%. Kukunin ang amount doon sa tinatawag nating asset under management or AUM. For example, if the asset under management is 1 billion pesos and the fund has an expense ratio of 1.5%, ang pinaka-expenses or pinaka-amount na kinukuha sa fund on a yearly basis is nasa 15 million pesos per year. So that is 1.5% of 1 billion pesos. Now, there's another type of expense sa mutual fund na kung tawagin naman ay load. Ano ba itong mga load? So these are one-time expense na isang beses lang kinukuha. Kapag bibili tayo and then merong load ang fund, ang tawag doon ay front-end load. Ang mga front-end load nasa 1% to 6%. Kapag naman tayo'y nagbenta or binenta natin ng mga shares at merong kinuha ang fund galing sa atin, ang tawag naman po doon ay back-end load. So that's when we sell our shares from the fund and typically nasa 5% po yun. But there are funds that do not have loads. Ang tawag sa kanila ay mga no-load funds. Kaya kapag bibili ka, buong-buo ang inyong pera na ma-invest doon sa or ma-convert into the number of shares sa fund. So ang front-end load nila ay 0%. May mga funds din na wala ding mga back-end load. Kapag magbibenta ka ng shares, buong-buo rin na makukuha mo ang inyong redemption amount calculated from the NAVPS at the time of redemption multiplied by the number of shares kung ilang shares po meron kayo doon sa mutual fund. Now, let's talk about the net asset value per share or what we call as NAVPS. This is the only number that that actually concerns you and me as an investor into the mutual fund. Ibig sabihin, ito lang po ang halos tinitingnan natin kapag tayo nag-i-invest sa fund. Ano po ba itong NAVPS? How is this calculated? And how is this value impacting us as investors in the fund? So first, the NAVPS is calculated by a very simple formula po. Madali lang pong computin. We do not need to calculate, but it's good to know how this very important number is being calculated. Para makuha ang NAVPS, i-divide lang po ang net asset value ng fund by the number of outstanding shares. The net asset value has two components. One is the assets, and then the other one is the liabilities of the fund. Now, what constitutes the assets of the fund? Ang assets ng fund are the underlying assets. Gaya ng pinakita natin kanina, it could be stocks or it could also be bonds. Whatever is the market value of the equities or the common stocks or the prevailing interest rate for bonds, that will constitute majority of the assets of the fund. And by the way, meron pang ibang assets ang fund. They could have cash. Typically, hindi po lahat ng pooled money ng fund ay ini-invest lahat. Ano naman po ang mga liabilities? Ang mga liabilities, ito po yung mga binabayaran ng fund. Ito yung kanya mga pagkakautang kung meron man, no? Short term or long term. Dito rin po ang taxes na binabayaran ng fund is also part of its liabilities. And of course, yung ating pinaka-expense ratio, ang management fees at operating expenses are also part of the liabilities of the fund. And that will be part of the calculation of the net asset value. Ngayon, kung meron tayong total assets and then total liabilities, makukuha natin ang NAVPS ng fund. Now, let's have some practical example. Halimbawa, ang fund has a market value ng kanyang stock holdings ay nasa 10 billion pesos. And then meron din siyang cash equivalents. Ito po yung kanyang mga deposits dun sa banko which also earns interest. So these are certificates of deposits. Meron siyang 90 million po doon. Meron po tayo dyan. And then, halimbawa, meron siyang cash na 10 million. So, ang total assets ng fund ay 10 billion plus 90 million plus 10 million is 10.1 billion or that's 10 million 100 million pesos. Now, let's calculate the total liabilities of the fund. Halimbawa, ang kanyang expense ratio is 1.5%. So, that's 151.5 million. And meron siyang taxes, let's say 10 million, and the other liabilities is 10 million. The total liabilities is 171.5 million pesos or 171,500,000 pesos. By the way, these total assets and total liabilities are calculated on a daily basis. Itong pinakita natin is for the whole year, and then i-divide lang po yan into the daily amount. Yun po ang magre-reflect dun sa NAVPS on a daily basis. So therefore, the net asset value, i-subtract lang po natin ang total assets, which is 10.1 billion minus 171.5 million. So that's 9.9, approximately 9.9 billion pesos ang total assets ng fund. We just need another value, which is called the number of outstanding shares. So shares is fixed when the fund is created, pero nagbabago rin po ito on a daily basis sapagkat merong nagbibenta ng kanyang shares, which is bought back by the fund, and then meron ding mga bumibili ng shares. So therefore, the fund issues those shares. So nagbabago ang outstanding number of shares. So halimbawa, at the time of calculation at that day, ay merong 100 million shares ang fund. And then based on the net asset value per share calculation, narito na po ang NAVPS of the fund on that day. So that's 9.9 billion divided by 100 million shares. So you have a net asset value per share of 99.285 per share. Now, how does the net asset value per share changes? Nagbabago ang net asset value per share kung alin man doon sa mga parameters na nasa formula ay magbabago. Halimbawa, yung assets, nagbabago yun araw-araw, kaya pwedeng magbago ang NAVPS. Ang expenses naman ay typically ay fixed po ito, kaya hindi po siya halos nagbabago on a daily basis. Yung number of shares ay pwede ring magbago gaya ng binanggit namin sapagkat merong nagre-redeem or di kaya may nagwi-withdraw. Now, how do we earn in a mutual fund? So I guess this is one of the biggest questions. We earn in two ways. Number one is when the NAVPS changes. If the NAVPS goes up, therefore we are earning, and if it goes down, then we are losing money. The second one is when the fund or the mutual fund company distributes dividends. There are mutual fund companies that distributes dividends, but other mutual fund companies reinvest the dividends into the fund. Paano ba nag-i-earn ng dividends ang mutual fund? Remember, for example, if the fund is an equity fund, so it invests in the stock market, when the fund manager decides na magbenta siya ng shares, ay pwede siyang magkaroon ng capital appreciation. And when the underlying assets or yung mga stock holdings ng mutual fund declare dividends, that dividends will be paid to the mutual fund company. Kaya yun yung mga earnings ng mutual fund. And that will actually change the NAVPS of the fund. So the dividends or the earnings of the fund, they can choose to distribute that to the investors, or they can choose to reinvest it to the fund. If they reinvest to the fund, then the NAVPS will go up. Ito po ang dalawang paraan kung paano po tayo kikita in investing in the mutual fund. So titingin tayo ng isang halimbawa kung paano tayo mag-invest sa mutual fund. So this is an actual transaction na ginawa ko noong April 2nd of 2020. So this was last year. So we bought a Phil Equity PSE index fund here. And during that time, the NAVPS of the fund was 3.6019. And then the amount that I invested was 1,000 pesos. Therefore, 1,000 pesos divided by 3.6019, that's around 278 shares. So, kinonvert lang ng Call Financial ang 1,000 pesos into the number of shares based on the current NAVPS when I bought Phil Equity PSE Index Fund. There's one thing to note here that the Phil Equity PSE Index Fund, when bought under Call Financial, they don't have a front-end load. So wala pong kaltas ang inyong 1,000 piso kapag ito ay gagamitin ninyo to buy Phil Equity PSE Index Fund. Okay? So buong-buo po siya na gagamitin para ma-convert into number of shares. Now, halimbawa, i-liquidate natin. That means we sell the shares of the Phil Equity PSE Index Fund today, which is March 1st, 2021. So currently, the Phil Equity PSE Index Fund is trading, or its NAVPS is at 4.554 pesos per share. Ngayon, remember, we have 278 shares, right? So that's 278 shares. And we have 4.554 NAVPS increase from 2nd of April last year to 1st of March this year. Therefore, ang net proceeds natin sa fund ay 4.554 multiplied by 278 shares. Therefore, we have net proceeds of 1,266.012, or that's a gain of 26.6%. One thing to note about Phil Equity PSE Index Fund ay yung tinatawag nating back-end load. So when you sell the fund, you have to sell it after the minimum holding period. So ang minimum holding period of the fund ay typically nasa 1 month to 3 months, or that means 90 days. May iba pa ay medyo matagal. Tignan po ninyo yon, kapag more than 1 month na po ay wala po silang charges na kukunin po sa inyo. Kung ililiquidate po ninyo ang inyong fund before the minimum holding period or within the minimum holding period, babayaran po ninyo yung fee, no, corresponding fee for the minimum holding period. But this one is already almost 1 year, so therefore wala na po tayong babayarang holding period nito. Kaya 1,266, if you invest 1,000 pesos, it's 1,266 you can get from the fund. Well, basically, guys, that's our primer, and that's the basics on how the mutual fund works. And in our next videos, ipapakita namin sa inyo what is the appropriate fund or mutual fund na nababagay sa inyo. What are the risks that are involved? And we will also have product reviews on different mutual funds, both in the Philippines and abroad. Kaya subaybayan po ninyo ang video na yan. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos on budgeting, saving, and investing. My name is Fermin. Until next time, maraming salamat po.